So, if you're still with me, we have the charter schools, which some of them can be good, some of them can be bad. But what this budget does is it creates a chartering board at the state level, which the governor would sit on. The governor would appoint people along with the leaders of both parties. Yeah, you're getting to see where this goes. And it allows for anybody in the state to petition to create a charter school with the lowest threshold. That they can end up, if you want to start a school, you can end up shopping around to different chartering authorities. But this one would be, I would think, the chartering authority of last resort, where you don't want to try something new, start up a charter, go for it. So it really starts it up in a scary way, breaks it away from the traditional public schools. Again, they get priority funding from that school. It gets so bad that even a school district, if they're having trouble, could end up, school board could vote and convert their entire school system into a chartering school, and every student would end up being required to attend that school. So that's also in the budget. Yes. So this really goes way too far in the way that education had traditionally been done in the state of Wisconsin. And I think that most people get that. Most people, when they see this clear contrast, are going to start speaking up. And I think for me, I think we want to make sure that we can invest in our young people, invest in those students. So as much as I could talk about environmental issues, I'm an environmentalist. I could talk about women's issues. I could talk about the other issues of pay equity, of equality, of other things that are bad that have been in this budget, or have been tackled over the last 2.5 years about labor rights. I think the issue of education, and it's probably arguable, the issue of education and cutting the funding there is the worst, because what it does is it puts a permanent scar across the board in all education levels across the state, where all of a sudden everybody is downshifted. And you can't, even if we end up taking the majority, which I think we will, and even if we have a new governor, which I think we will, and even if we are able to turn the assembly, which I think we will, now maybe not all of them next year, but over time we will. Problem is, we will always have a permanent scar that will exist within our system from this time, where we completely downshifted on education, where we had this huge cut, where we had to increase the number of students in a classroom, where we downplayed the importance of being an educator and what that means to those students and to our community. And I think that scar is going to be one that we have to live with, and we're going to try to have to overcorrect for in the years to come. Because you can't retake third grade a year later, 2 years later. Once that's missed, it's going to take a long time for us to make that up. And that's why education was my most important issue on the education committee, and that's why it continues to be part of pretty much every speech or any discussion we end up having about the state of Wisconsin, because it's an issue that touches every life in the state of Wisconsin. Whether you realize it or not, we're all affected by it. So that's, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I didn't miss any of these things. So just to give you a clear idea too, because I talked in vague language about the increased voucher expansion, while we're getting 0% for public schools, it's up to a 22% increase for voucher schools. So yeah, it's a huge difference compared to what it had been. So we're getting 0% for one and 22 for another. In the same time, the charter schools, the independent charter schools, there's 23 million additional for independent charter authority, and then the new oversight board, which I talked about. So that's where the funds are going, and I think that's important. It's always important to talk about, the 0%, the freeze, at the same time as there's a huge expansion happening on other side. So with that, Jan's signaling me, but I don't understand. I don't speak sign language. Jan, take questions?
Take questions?
Yeah, we do take questions. If there's anything else you
Time to ask questions. How are you?
I can have my smoothie.
Are
Yes.
the Republicans getting any heat from the local districts about the collapse of the education system? Or are they still believing that it's going to be better?
Yeah, if you guys didn't hear, his question was, are the Republicans getting heat for these cuts from their educators, from their home districts? The answer is yes. Yes, they are. And what's really remarkable about it is that it seems that there's a sense that there might be some changes on the horizon. I think that you end up seeing somebody like Mike Ellis, who's in a iffy district, who came out against the voucher expansion. And so you end up seeing Luther Olson, who is the education chair. He has come out and said, like, we need to look at least, what is it, $150 or $200, he said.
He said 150.
150, Tony Evers, we were hoping to try and get $250 per pupil funding increase. And then the 150 is what Luther Olson has floated as the idea of how much we could get per pupil increase for education. And so they're also very opposed to the voucher expansion. Now there may end up being some type of a compromise. We're trying to push for, with the petition today and with other efforts that we're pushing, we're trying to push for a zero expansion of the voucher system at a time where it's unaccountable. They've been unaccountable for years, and that our traditional public schools are lagging so far behind. But yes, there is some motion there, and I think if you have friends in Republican areas, to talk to them. If you are an educator who has friends who are in other school districts, to talk to them. Because I think there is a sense that this can change. The other part that I left out, I always have to say this because I don't think I think it's important to point out why vouchers have expanded so darn much. And the reason is because there's a lot of political money out there to support the voucher program. You know, they're not so good at getting the test results. They're not so good at educating the kids. But man, are they good at funneling the campaign cash to the places they really need to. When I ran against that Democrat two and a half years ago, he had a heck of a lot more money than I did, and a lot of that came from that support group. So it does go to Democrats sometimes. But they are very good at funneling money to campaigns. So, which is why I think you saw this unchecked blossoming of the program in Milwaukee for 23 years. And then what's remarkable is all of a sudden now, I think there's a chance to stop the expansion because suddenly it's coming home to their districts where they had benefited from the campaign cash for years. Now all of a sudden, shoot, they have to deal with the results of, you know, they know it's bad. They knew it was bad, but it didn't affect them. You know, it was over in Milwaukee. You know, we all know what we feel about Milwaukee, right? And so they knew that. And so once it's coming back to their backyard, now they don't like it so much. So it's really interesting. I think there is a potential for them to stall it. So what Ellis was saying is that he thinks that there's a majority of Republicans in the Senate. So there are discussions about what's going to happen. But yeah, there is hope.
Is it really coming home to them in their backyards? There's something about 4,000 students in the school district as qualification for the voucher system.
Yeah.
Why 4,000? And what does it put in them?
Yeah. So the qualifications is that it has to have 4,000, a minimum of 4,000 students in the school district, and then you have to have is it two or more districts that are deemed failing by the report card system that was just engaged. Sorry, two schools that are deemed failing, and that ends up meaning, so you know all 9 cities, that's Waukesha, that's West Allis, that's Beloit, that's Fond du Lac, Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, Sheboygan, and Superior. Now, why that? It's a good question. So you have actually some Republicans who are saying, well, let's blow the cover off of it, let's expand it everywhere. I think that there was a sense that they wanted to end up limiting it in some sense, in some scope, to more urban areas because of the size of that district. Because it could absorb some of this hit, and you wouldn't see the resulting damage immediately. I think that's why they ended up shifting it, but I don't know. As much as I've worked across from the governor, I don't always know why he does the things that he does.
But you must have looked at the predominant representation from those particular urban areas.
There are some, yeah. There are, 7 of the 9 are in Democratic areas, but a couple of them are in, actually 3 of them are in Republican areas. So 6 of them are in Democrat, 3 are in Republican areas. The Waukesha, Appleton, and Sheboygan are in Republican areas. So, and that's where you're seeing some opposition. So.
How good are the schools in districts where they're less than 4,000?
They end up, he asked how good are the school districts in the areas where there's less than 4,000. The tricky thing about this is the school report card system, it just started. They just adjusted it. And there's actually they've actually talked to us about how this system should not be used for, performance-based data yet. Because it shows under the first year that it's going to be low, it'll adjust over time. And you really need a year-to-year comparison to make sure that you know that it's effective. And it shouldn't be used for what it's used for, because even good performing good performing schools can show up negatively on the report card the way that it's done. And so there's a lot of them ended up showing that they've fallen back across the state, are showing that there's problems. So yeah, it's not that these other ones that are over 4,000 are doing really well or are doing that much worse. I think it was just a standard that he set, if that makes sense. It doesn't, I know, but that's how they ended up setting it up.
Well, I mildly annoyed with you mentioning boys, since I live there, but
Yeah,
just mildly.
I didn't add Beloit, I added Beloit. Yeah.
When I'm retired, but I'm not wealthy, so I put one of the criteria you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And I work for a large company, we call them companies like General Motors.
Yeah.
When we have these meetings, there's, when I say there's 2 agendas, there's 2 conversations that go on. The customer says they want the best price, which they mean the lowest price.
Right.
And we say we want the best price.
Yeah.
Well, that's the highest price.
Right.
Actually, though, there's another set of things going on there. And sales technique, you try to uncover the objections.
Mm-hmm.
So the customer has an objection, but they're not going to tell you right off the bat.
Yeah.
Here, when I read the Janesville Gazette, they're talking basically about the financing, and you've been talking about that.
Yeah.
Of school districts. Me, as an interested private citizen, I'm not affiliated with any school district.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the results that they get. So, the graduation rate.
Right.
Boyd just passed a $70+ million referendum. Nowhere was it mentioned that this would increase the graduation rate.
Right.
Janesville, a few years ago, passed coincidentally a similarly sized referendum. Nowhere, even the superintendent of the Janesville district at the time admitted that, well, there's no study that's ever been done, there's no report that says this will help
Graduation.
academic performance.
Yeah.
And your choices once you graduate.
Yeah.
So I think there's this uncovered issue, and one group wants more money, the other group wants to give less money. So, just focusing on the people who want to give less money, what do you think? I haven't seen this in any newspaper.
Yeah.
Is uncover the objections. And what are they? That's my question.
Uncovered about the objections of.
Of the people who are Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine that you sit down and talk to him and what, do you really hate school kids, or do you know, I mean, he wouldn't say anything like that. But is he going to tell you what is really on his mind?
Yeah. So his question is about what Walker's
Agenda.
real agenda, real motive.
Well,
He wants to be president.
I want to give him,
Right.
So,
The objective, I mean, quite honestly, the objective of the program, if I had to try and guess what
objective, what do they object to? Not their.
what do they object?
objectives, yeah.
What do they object to?
What are
With
their,
the,
what are their uncovered concerns? with
what they're
respect-
saying their concerns are?
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
Well,
So what? Okay, so I'll try and answer as best I can. I think what the governor ends up saying, and you can look at this publicly, what they end up saying is their problem is they're saying, well, the school districts are having problems, or the schools are having problems, or the students don't have choice, are the main issues that they end up throwing out there. And you can end up breaking those down one by one, you know, because if you end up saying, well, the school district is failing, it's not a school district necessarily that's failing, it might be individual school, it might be individual students, you can target it that way. And further, you wouldn't end up setting a system where you end up punishing them by cutting the amount of funds that go to them if you're trying to fix it. You also end up seeing the argument of saying, oh, school students should have choice. And specifically, this argument was really prevalent back in 1990 when they instituted the program. They said, all of these rich people can go to private schools. They can send their kids to private schools because they're pulling them out of the public schools. There are poor inner city youth. There's poor students who will never have access to a private education. If we just had a choice program, we'd be able to help them with a scholarship to send them to the private schools because they're so much better than our public schools. That argument, you hear it every once in a while, but it's a hollowed out shell of itself. Because when they expanded it last year, Walker changed the income qualification to 3 times poverty. What the number is we calculate for poverty. So for a family, that can be between $60,000 and $80,000 a year that you're making. And it also says that you can end up having your kids in these private schools already. And we saw that happening all of a sudden once this expanded. And it also said a once in, always in. So you can end up having a lower income one year, but you're qualified forever. And so you can end up having that where students who are already in the system, but their parents are like, oh shoot. Suddenly it just becomes a big break for them where they get money back where they were sending their kids to a private school anyways. So those are the things that they end up saying, but I'll give you what I think the real motivation is, and somebody shouted it. He's interested in politics. He's interested in wanting to run for president. And there's this competition. You end up seeing it where it becomes how can you attract the biggest Republican base or the most extreme Republican Tea Party base. And even with that, there's also the other side of it, which is how can you get some good, big money Republican donors. And you all remember the phone call from David Koch? We hadn't heard from Scott Walker in some time, and all of a sudden there was this phone call that came out on YouTube where he thought he was talking to a billionaire. And so the Waltons are the biggest funders of the voucher expansion. Waltons are the richest family in America, the heirs of the Walton fortune, of the Walmart, and they're big fans of this, of pulling money away from public education. They have a lot of money to throw around in elections, and there's a lot of other groups, as I mentioned. There's a lot of money to be thrown out there. So by doing this kind of big, no-holds-barred expansion, it's ringing the bells to the national Republicans and say, look how far I'll go in trying to cut down those evil, I'll use a word that Senator Glenn Grothman uses. Cover your ears. Where he'll say, look how much I'm cutting down on the government schools. That's what he'll call it. We're cutting the government schools. And so he's showing that off to say, look how much in getting that national attention. The same way they went after public sector unions, the same way they repealed equal pay for equal work 2 years ago, the same way they made it harder for people to hold businesses accountable through tort reform. In the same way they do a lot of these other more extreme bills. It draws that attention, it draws the Tea Party base. And I use the biggest example, and kind of changing a little bit of the direction, is what ended up happening with the Medicaid expansion, the Badger Care, strengthening of Badger Care, where you end up seeing people like Governor John Kasich of Ohio, who was a Republican presidential contender, where you end up seeing Jan Brewer of Arizona. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's the one who was a big fan of the let's card everybody and check their citizenship in Arizona. She accepted this. Even in Michigan, you know how crazy Michigan is with the stuff that they're doing. They took the expansion. And I think that the biggest reason, and this is the biggest frustration, the reason that the governor turned down this expansion of Medicaid funds, which is 100% funded by the federal government for the next 3 years, 100% funded, 100%. I can't get that, I mean, 100%. That's, the money is allocated for this purpose and this purpose alone. It also covers 80,000 more people in the state. Actually, it's more than that. I think it's 170,000.
Yep.
170,000 it would cover in the state of Wisconsin. On top of that, it costs the state less. It would save us money because it frees up GPR, because otherwise we pay 40% of Medicaid and the match that we currently have. So it saves us more money to spend on, I don't know, education. But on top of that, it would create 10,500 net new jobs. But on top of that, it would make us all healthier. And I think the biggest reason that he turned this down, and as much as I've meditated on this and tried to figure it out, I think the biggest reason is that so he, in a Republican presidential debate, can have that as a punchline. Say like, I didn't take the Obamacare money. That's it. Because otherwise, every other word salad he throws out there just does not make any sense as to what they're doing. It's costing us more, insuring less, helping less people, less jobs. I think that's it. It's just that pure ideology and pureness to be able to get more attention for if he wants to do a run. And it's not just, and I say that with sincerity that I'm trying to think about this, because I've been opposite him now for 5 years. And every step that I've seen is his motivation to try and get to a higher level, a higher office, and to use that lily pad that he was on before and jump to the next one. And if you need any clear statement of what happens over time, Milwaukee County, where he was the county executive, doesn't vote for him anymore. It doesn't even vote over 40% of people voting for him anymore, because that's the place that knows him best. Where he was county executive. They know what he's about, they know what he's done, they know what he does in their community. And they refuse, they figure it out, and I just hope that the state of Wisconsin starts to figure it out sooner rather than later, that his fate, he's not casting his lot with the state of Wisconsin, he's casting it against the state of Wisconsin.